Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I feel very honored and privileged to be invited to speak here in this great palace of Westminster. And I thank Lord Virgie and Lord Stone for taking time from their busy schedules to invite me here and to be also present here. Growing up in India, the Westminster model of democracy was held up to us as a shining example, and I'm happy to be here where it all began. So, first let me greet you with a namaste, which is the Indian greeting, which basically is a symbol of two hearts coming together. And also salam, which is peace, and shalom, which is peace. So, usually I'm accustomed to just talk extempore, but that I'm talking at the House of Lords made me scribble down a few notes so that I don't go rambling on and finish. I have half an hour to finish. So, I'm sorry about this reading the notes, because the subject, for instance, normally would be that I speak on the Upanishads or the Gita or something like that. But this is the House of Lords, and I'm supposed to steer clear as much as possible without leaning to any particular religion. So I have prepared a script, so I'm going to read it. Of course, we'll have a Q&A session after this. If you have any doubts, we could still discuss. So I thank Lady Mohini for introducing me. She said I'm a yogi, but a yogi also needs glasses. Now, if I had to offer one piece of advice to myself, to my young self, which is inside, it would be to come and study in Oxford. Yesterday, for the first time, my wife and I visited Oxford, and we were greatly inspired by the educational ethos of the place. I believe one is never too old to learn. The heart is young anyway, and I hope so is the brain. So it's the next step. Now, subject matter is inspired virtuous leadership. 1,000 years before the great William Shakespeare, the wisdom teachings of ancient India, the Upanishads, I can't help mentioning this, talking about leaders and guides puffed up with pride and egotism, laboring under the illusion that they were omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent. Referring to such guides, leaders. Leaders are those who guide. The Upanishad said, Andheinaiva niyamana yatandaha, which means the blind leading the blind. I am saying this is not much before Shakespeare, but you find it in Shakespeare, 1,000 years ago, in Sanskrit. Now, another great sage who walked the streets of Jerusalem said, you are the salt of the earth, and if the salt has lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? That's the situation. I'm not particularly talking about anybody, but if the salt, which is the leader, has lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? What can we use it for? So, a virtuous leader, which is my subject, I believe is one who understands himself well, both his strengths and weaknesses, and therefore understands the ones he leads. And this is not confined to politics. When we say leader, we immediately think of the German word Führer. It's not just confined to politics. Leaders are required in all walks of life. Now, here's what England's own bard, Shakespeare, says in the 12th Night, which was quoted by Abraham Lincoln. I'm sure it's very popular, you know it. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon. Now, when a leader is virtuous, doesn't have to use a trumpet to advertise his greatness. It's there in the actions, and the public senses it, and however reluctant he may be to acknowledge it for the humility. Again, you must remember that humility is also born of virtue. It's a sign of virtue. It's thrust upon him somehow or the other. The virtuous heart is of the essence. In its absence, professional leaders, business gurus, and Wall Street giants have fallen as fast and as hard as King Richard III and II and Macbeth and all the flawed and tragic monarchs have fallen. I quote Queen Margaret in Henry the IV. Was it you that would be king? Was it you who revelled in our parliament and made a preachment of your high descent? Where are your mess of sons to back you now? It's about the fall. I come to that. Now, a few important points of a virtuous leader. One, a virtuous leader, I believe, leads the way by example, establishes principles concerning the way people should be treated, and create opportunities for victory. Above all, mercy and compassion are the hallmarks of a virtuous leader. I quote, Merchant of Venice, Act 4, Scene 1. I would be saying the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads. I deliberately took Shakespeare. So, the quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. How explicitly put by Shakespeare. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. Compassion and mercy are so important if it really happens to be a virtuous leadership. Also, point number 2, leaders inspire a shared vision. They breathe life into the vision and see existing possibilities for the future. Here is an example of shared vision from Henry V, Act 4, Scene 3. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers and gentlemen in England, now a bit, shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and had their manhood's cheap wiles any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's day. Point number 3, leaders are also ready to change status quo. You don't have to stick to status quo all the time. You need to change status quo, which means think out of the box and give their followers, freedom to think. The moment somebody says, don't think, think dangerous, watch out. Think. I quote, Hamlet, Act 2, Scene 2. Let each man do his best. Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 3. Give every man thy ear, but few thy voice. 4. Encourage the heart. Give hope to even the most dejected. Celebrate accomplishments so people feel like heroes. I recommend Joseph Campbell, if you would like have time, to read The Hero with 1,000 Faces. It's a special reading which is very good for all who are leaders and who aspire to be leaders, virtuous leaders. Heroes are virtuous and brave. You know the story of David and Goliath. The biggest thing can be handled if you're virtuous and if you are brave. I quote once again Henry V, Act 3, Scene 1. Once more unto the breach, this is well known, popular. Dear friends, once more, or close the world up with our English debt. In peace, there is nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of a tiger. In the Indian text known as the Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, pick up thy bow, Arjuna. Fear not, for you are protecting the righteous. My final quote from Shakespeare. I don't want to bore you with Shakespeare. My final quote from Shakespeare, lest I bore you. Henry V act is the sun and the moon, for it shines bright and never changes, but keeps its course true. Here, as I see it, are a few important characteristics of a virtuous leader. One, humility. I'm not talking about false, cultivated variety of humility. I'm talking about humility that comes from the heart when one knows, it is a fact, that one does not know. It's when you say, I know. It's very easy to say, I know. It's very difficult to say, I don't know. So when somebody asks you a question, if you don't know, instead of finding the wrong answer, it's better to say, well, I don't know, let me look into this. So humility comes out of that. And kindness, compassion, tolerance, facing facts, control of anger, concern for the well-being of those who serve. In short, recognizing the fact that we, all of us, irrespective of creed, religion and nationality, are after all human beings with their joys and sorrows, success and failure, and to be able to guide humanity and usher in a world of prosperity, happiness and peace above all. And if I can change myself, I can change the world. There's no way out. I can't go and change the world, I need to change it here first. That's my duty. With this in mind, my friends and I went on a walk for 2 months and covered 7,500 kilometers on foot. Please, it's possible. Gandhi walked many times. Short walks, of course, but he did. Since then, we have walked in Berlin, in The Hague, the International Court of Justice. And tomorrow we are working in Birmingham. Bhai Sahab, who is here, my dear friend, has taken the initiative to organize Birmingham Walk, Walk of Hope for Peace. All are welcome. So, how we need virtuous leaders today? We do. It's the need of the hour before the world plunges into a third world war and is 3/4 destroyed. Lastly, I fervently plead that the ancient wisdom teaching of the East and the West, I include the classics, Shakespeare for example, may not be neglected in our rush towards modernization. Sometimes misunderstood as discarding the old, but this can contribute to a large extent to the bringing about of a virtuous leadership. May I end with an ancient prayer from the Vedas. These Vedas are non-denominational, so they happen to be in Sanskrit, so it's just a language, it's a classical language. And it's a beautiful prayer. It says, Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma amritam gamaya. Which means, may I be led from the real to the unreal. Here you can say real, from the unreal to the real. Here unreal is being not virtuous, and real being virtuous. From the darkness into light, and from death to that which is beyond death. I think it's half an hour here. So thank you very much, sir, for once again inviting me to the House of Lords, which I think in the past and the present has planted many a seed of change in this world. Thank you very much.
Actually selfish, because I wanted to hear this. because I myself am on a personal journey, Mohini knows this. I had an abusive childhood and I was dyslexic, and by the time I was 16 I was scared of everybody and had to find a way of surviving. And the way I survived was not to meet people with honesty, but to put a front on. You seem to be successful, but nobody knows you. They know this thing that you put on, which is an act. And it's about time you found yourself before you die. So why did you take a year off and go and find yourself? And I was talking to Mohini, and Mohini is saying, look, it comes from all the various wisdoms, and I've already now been on Vipassana, 15-day silent meditation. I spent a month in Israel with some rabbis. Next week I'm going to India, and I'm trying to find myself. Why am I trying to find myself? Not selfishly, but because all of you, and we particularly invited all of you, whether you believe it or not, are leaders. And we have an all-party parliamentary group on mindfulness here. We're trying to make individuals understand that you can stop and rest and become yourself. But that's one thing. But the other thing is then we have to lead. Because if we're going to save the planet, we have to become leaders, and we have to understand that even though we don't believe it of ourselves, we are leaders, and if we take the advice of the 6-point plan, then we can become leaders. So this is a practical afternoon to enable you to learn some things from each other and from Sriram about leadership, so please ask any questions. And it's going to be difficult for you to get them in because you can see I don't stop talking when I'm in. So please, any points you'd like to make or questions? Should we take a couple at a time? Yeah. Okay. What? Yes?
So Sriram, could you talk a little bit about your childhood and how you saw the sort of spiritual enlightenment? I mean, I've read about your life history, and you saw spiritual enlightenment when you were 9 years old, maybe earlier. So, could you talk about your sort of spiritual enlightenment?
Yeah, please. Thank you. We are a fourth generation immigrant family from across the border. When my great-great-grandfather came from what is now Peshawar as personal bodyguard to the Maharajas of Travancore. So that's how we happened to come to Kerala in the south of India. And therefore, I was brought up in a way in which Islamic household operates, in the sense that, not that they were very orthodox, but you need to read the Quran and so on. It so happened my first incentive, probably the first movement came. The person who used to come to teach the Quran turned out to be a Sufi. So instead of learning the Quran, I went deeper into the understanding of other things which are important to spiritual life. So this is what happened, and then I can't say I was illumined at the age of 9. But something important did happen at the age of 9. When I was a young boy playing outside on the backyard of my house, I happened to meet a very special person standing under the jackfruit tree. But that was only a 2-minute meeting when he touched my head and said, when the time comes, things will be sorted out. Well, in those days, it looked very peculiar because I have never seen a person like that. Bare-bodied, just wearing a white cloth, matted hair. And then he just went away. He walked out. From that time, something happened to my head. And when the time when children would normally play, I would sit and look at the sky. And looking at the clouds, I've never been to the Himalayas or heard of them before. I mean, heard of them a little bit. I used to think that the clouds were snow-clad peaks of the Himalayas. Things started changing, and then when I finished my college and I was 19, I felt that I was in some kind of cage. I had to get out. Well, the cage was very good. We were a wealthy family, so it was a golden cage. A cage is a cage. It's gold or iron, it doesn't matter. So one day, the bird flew out. And for a natural reason, something pulled me to the Himalayas, and I kept walking. I suffered a lot because coming out from a house where in the morning they ask you to have breakfast 10 times, and you say, no, I don't want. And then you're hungry, you don't know what to eat, and so on. But I suffered a bit, and then I reached the Himalayas, and the rest is in the autobiography. I met the same person whom I met at the age of 9 in a cave called the Vyasa Gufa. It's still there in existence in the Himalayas, and beyond the Badrinath, on the way to the Tibetan border. And then I said to him, I'll never leave you now, I'm going to stay with you forever. So he smiled and said, we'll think about it. In Hindi he said, Dekha jayega. So I spent about 3.5 years with him, and whatever is there in here is what happened during those 3.5 years, since you asked me that question. But then it was not like a big bang. My experience is that it develops gradually. It opens up slowly. It's not like suddenly you're... But the path is shown and you move. And so then one day he said, go back and settle down in the normal world as everybody is. And I said, I'm not going. Why would I go and get stuck? He said, get out. So I came and he said to me, I have 2 more minutes to answer.
Oh, you have plenty of time.
So he said to me that if you sit inside a cave and meditate for 30 years, for 12 hours a day, and if you think that you have conquered your anger, you have conquered your jealousy, you are free, you're mistaken, because there's nobody in the cave. It's only when you come out, get into a bus, and somebody kicks you on your foot, especially with a stiletto heel, and you know where you stand. You know where you stand. So he said, get out. You cannot know yourself until you are in social secure, without meeting people. That's the benchmark. How do we find out? So he sent me out. He also said, get married, be normal. I said, but I cannot be normal, I'm abnormal. He said, yeah, but pretend to be. So here I am. I'm wearing a bandana suit and so on. If it was not so cold, I would rather be like my master. Thank you.
Question?
Yes. So you started your speech by saying that there is no time in history where it is more important to speak about virtuous leadership. And that very much touches me, and I agree. But amongst having, I'm sorry to bring to the table the negative side, such a lack of virtuous leadership within society, and so much power behind that non-virtuous leadership, how does one hold this position of virtue and actually lead others to follow that which will be more wholesome for themselves and society, and at the same time not create a schism of I'm good, that is bad, and be inclusive in the process?
It requires, I don't know if I can really answer you this question, but I can give you a few thoughts from what I think.
Yeah.
Food for thought. First, I have to be virtuous. I have to follow and practice the principles which I'm talking about. Then it goes to the next person and the next person. Before I put my neighbor's house in order, I need to put my own house in order. Right? So I think we have to start from here. All these hundreds of years, things have happened, but I think there hasn't been a real change in this matter, because people have thought more about external reform and not about eternal. So I think one has to start here, and then the practicalities of how to make it reach there is something very, very individual and depends on various circumstances, which I can't work out for you. But I think it should start here. Say that I will be humble, I will be virtuous, I want peace, I'm not going to war. I know it's not easy, it's very difficult. But then, the greatest things on earth or in heavens have been achieved through many obstacles. We need to do that. Because you see, when the whole world is moving in one stream, if somebody stands up and says, I'm going to swim on the opposite side against the current, it's not easy. But I think it's possible. Now I have to say something. See, I'm 69, a great. There are many people who are older than me here. Lord Stone said he's 74. He's very young, his mind is young, I saw him.
That's because I don't take responsibility.
So then, I think the solution for this, to a great extent, lies with the young. Now, it's about time we hand over this responsibility to the young, and believe me, they can take care of it. So, the young are the most important part of the civilization now. We can do something. I'm sorry, you can do something. I'm saying we because at heart, like him, I also think I'm very young. So if we take responsibility, then I think things will change. It's not easy. The strategies, it's individual. You have to work out according to the political climate, according to the situation. But this thing should be firm that I'll stick to this. I will be virtuous. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Gospel.
Yes.
So, you say that leadership needs mercy. It seems to me that all the great leaders we know of, from Churchill to those generals, to Mao, to Stalin, all those ghastly Germans, to Muhammad himself, mercy was not their thing.
So therefore, I cannot question that Churchill was a powerful person and did a lot of things. There's no question about that. I think that mercy thing would have added one more beautiful dimension if he didn't have it. I don't know.
Or taken away achievement.
I wouldn't say that. Rather, I would say if there was the element of love and mercy and compassion added to some of the great world leaders, things would have changed now. May not have changed in their own lifetime, maybe, but they would have planted the seeds and we would have imitated them. Now, I like to read the wit and wisdom of Churchill. It's a small little book, interesting. But there are some things missing out there which probably he didn't think it was so important. So, we're talking about the present and the future, so can we bring it in now? Can we change?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I teach leadership at Oxford, and since you mentioned Oxford and young people, we're in the process of redesigning some of our leadership programs in thinking about virtuous leadership and how do you lead for the future given the present situation. And I wonder if you have thoughts on how do you train virtuous leaders?
First, we have to be very clear when we define virtue. The training part comes next. We need to understand, when I say virtue, it means that I will speak the truth. Somebody came to me and said, how do I practice this particular meditation which I teach? I said, you need to be truthful. He said, but I'm a lawyer. So, there are some practical difficulties with this. But, however, if your mind is clear that you stick to the truth, one is that. The other is that humility is of the essence. I don't know everything. I should say, okay, I don't know. Let me learn from what others are doing. And since you're teaching, your faculty, are you teaching also? So when you see the student, I'm sure you know this, but I'm saying that sometimes the students know much more than what we do. So when the student begins to understand that you respect this, that one doesn't think one is omniscient in any subject, and then there is an understanding and there is a bond that develops between the teacher and the taught. I have been with the teacher for 2.5 years, very traditional teacher of course. But then in that 2.5 years, a lot of change has happened to me. It can happen. I was young then, I was like a student, I was 19 years old. So I think this is possible because the students, young people are always watching us. So it's more than the teaching that we give them, how we live and demonstrate that we live the teaching. I think if that can be part, I'm sure it is, I don't know, if you can make that part of your teaching efforts, you might be planting the seeds which will tomorrow grow into a beautiful tree whose shade we can all sit in peace.
Yes, Stephen?
What's your view on the golden rule? Treat others as you wish to be treated. Could it be, what's your view on the golden rule?
The golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. So in most religions, the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated yourself.
Yeah.
Stephen?
Okay.
All right.
Could this be the game-changing principle to unlock our best future?
I think so. You treat your neighbor as you treat yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If you hurt somebody, feel in your heart how you would feel if you're hurt. You know, sometimes we get caught up in this emotion and think we're doing good to some and causing harm to others in the process. Happens. I mean, the world is like that. But we should think that perhaps how does this guy feel? How do I feel if somebody did the same thing to me? You're right. So this is a golden rule. Always think of what would happen to me if I was in the same position. Okay.
I was wondering, looking at the world over the last week, in China there's been a very big statement from the president, and it seems that the leadership in China has delivered tremendous advances in standard of living for many, many people in China, but perhaps at some spiritual costs. And in your wonderful country, India, there's tremendous spirituality, but there isn't quite the same advance in what maybe we call toilets. And how does one balance off the spiritual benefits versus the material benefits of life?
I think, as far as spiritual teachings are concerned, we are saturated. We have enough of spiritual teachings. I want to tell you something. There was a great teacher in India called Swami Vivekananda. I don't know if you've heard of him. He came to the West many years ago, maybe 100 years ago. And when somebody asked him, some Christian missionaries told him that why don't you go and, when some of his friends said, why don't you go into the rural villages? Why are you only in the city? Go to the rural areas and teach people how to become more spiritual. He said, are you pulling my leg? In the rural areas in India, what people need is food. Right? So first take care of their food. And if you really want to teach in rural areas, go there with maps, with telescopes, with microscopes, make them open up. And then they will think of God later. So I think now we are saturated. It's about time we also give attention to other things. In fact, one of the root teachings of the Vedas says, Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu, which means may the whole world be happy. Now happiness, as you said, could come with it. There are more toilets. But then if you have more toilets, people should use them. So education is important. So some work is going on, I would say, but it needs to still improve. The religious teachers in India should, I think many of them understand now, should understand that being religious is not meditating and just sitting down and chanting. but going and looking after the less privileged and helping them, kindness is very important. I think if this happens, then India will also improve. But that China has improved, but if there is no spiritual element, I think in time it might collapse back to there.
It's interesting that those are two questions where you have to have one and the other. The same with the mercy. There's a statue of Queen Victoria who has mercy on the one hand, justice on the other. And apparently in Judaism, there is a theory that there was a universe that was produced with just mercy. It was just mercy, but there was no justice, and it fell apart. So then there was a world that was just justice and no mercy, and it was horrible. So therefore you have to have a balance of the two. So what the Master is saying is that in all these things you have to have a balance of two. There's a question from the back, and then you'll say it.
I wonder if you let me stray into the negative and ask you about young people being misled by charismatic leaders. I used to run a European Federation of Family Support Groups, which is really aimed at people who've lost children into cults.
In cults?
Cults. Which is everything from Moonies and Scientologists to one-to-one manipulation, all the way down, hundreds and hundreds of organizations where people are alienated from their families and abused for money or for sex or for free work or whatever it is. So we rather think that young people ought to be taught when they see charisma, when they see very persuasive speakers, to question exactly what is the motive, because there are many, many dangers out there.
Absolutely. I think, in fact, I am also one of the people who keep receiving emails after emails from the kind of young people which you're talking about. Because I don't have any outward signs of so-called, I don't wear robes, I don't, so people think it's easy to talk to this guy. I do get, it's unfortunate that, but one need not associate charisma with only the negatives. There have also been good people with charisma. So we have to differentiate between the two. And it is true. In fact, if you go to the inner teachings of the Indian system of thought philosophy, dependence is not appreciated. You are taught to stand on your own feet. But if you want to make a cult, then you have to make the guy dependent on you. Now that's not the way to lead a virtuous life. I think a person should, first thing they say is, oh, forget all your thinking, put it in the freezer. Now how do you expand? How do you grow if you do that? That's not the right approach to it. Of course I can understand that there are many things that can't be understood by a limited intellect. I understand that. But saying that, the idea of a teacher or a leader should be not to make a person dependent, but rather to make them stand on their own feet. If this dependency is introduced and appreciated and encouraged, I think all intelligent people should put a stop to this. This is my confirmed opinion. There should be space for dissent. There should be space for thinking. I think that's the way to expand spiritually. That's what I think. And if I have charisma, suppose, I don't know, I can do nothing about it. Thank you, sir.
Political, economical, and religious unrest throughout the world.
Certainly.
Do you have any advice for the leaders, and do you think they will listen to your advice?
Sir, I have been trying. I have been trying to make them listen, but I'm nobody. So I don't know how to get across.
So what is your advice?
The advice is people like you, people who are in power, people who are in politics, should now convene a meeting, all the world leaders together, not the United Nations. I think United Humanity, UH. And then, if something can come out of that. It's about time this is done. I was reading your article, your talk yesterday on the Middle East thing, which there is always a space for consensus and understanding and discussion. If that discussion stops, if the dialogue stops, there is no way the world can change. We have to encourage this dialogue, and it's the responsible people who should do this. If I go, I don't know how much I can do, but what I do instead is instill this in the minds of the young, so that when they grow up probably into MPs and whatever, they'll handle it better. That's all that I can do at the moment. But I would, in fact, I would plead that we have some kind of a global union of politics like MPs and so on, or the lords and so on, so they can get together and discuss this matter before we are destroyed. You are right, it's a terrible thing that can happen at any moment. We have people sitting with buttons for nuclear warfare under their fingertips. Anytime they press it, even innocent people are going to die. And politics. I think nationalism is on one side, we need a globalism on the other to counter it. I don't know, I said too many things.
No, but we have the opportunity now because technology has allowed that to happen. And perhaps instead of United Nations, we should have you and I, which is united individuals. And individuals that get together and sort it out. We'll start a new organisation. Okay, so just to say, perhaps we should finish at 4:30 so we can have some tea, because I've been looking at those sandwiches. And that's another 10 to 12 minutes, so we've got another 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll have tea. Yes?
What is the practical steps from being a transformation from being a leader to a virtuous leader? Can you give any practical?
Say that again.
The transformation.
I can say this much. You see many leaders, right? You know there are many leaders. Just look if they have concern for others. How much concern do they have for others? And how less selfish are they? And how useful are they to the rest of society, which is underprivileged? If these things can be inculcated. Now, also, I think a leader with humility is a true leader. A leader is there due to various reasons. It could be luck, it could be hard work, it could be because of his character or his charisma. He's there. So once he reaches there, he should think, now I'm here. What better thing can I do than most people have done? Can I move forward? I think if this thought begins to occur, then you have, I wouldn't say even a virtuous, I would say a creative leadership. A leadership that creates new opportunities for others. It creates more venues for people to think and come together, and that would be virtuous.
Thank you. I would like to ask, if I am a virtuous leader, how can I influence now? So I've been through my soul journey. I have stood again for what I see as virtue. How do I now influence my peers as a virtuous leader to join me?
If you have touched it, if you have really touched this thing which you call virtue, which he has, then I'm sure anyone who gets in touch and in contact with you, even without you doing something, will imbibe something from this. This is my feeling. Because when virtue really grows, really blossoms forth in a heart, it has a tremendous energy, which may not be like atomic energy, but it's like a peaceful energy that affects the others. And I think even without doing a thing, you would still feel that people begin to share the virtue with you. You know, I understand. I'm saying this not because of myself, but because of my master, my teacher, my Ishwarnath Babaji. Many a time I felt that just being with him had changed things for me. Why? Because in his heart there was not an inch, I didn't see, of selfishness. There was not an inch of self-importance. There was a man, when he went into some monasteries, the Mahamandaleshwar stood up, but he was so humble.
those circumstances? That's the first one. And second one is, what according to you is the definition of a successful life?
Before, some are born great, maybe not all, some achieve it. So I think there are two kinds of leaders. Some are born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and there are some others, but then it can also deteriorate according to their actions. They may be born leaders, but they can deteriorate. There are some who work hard and become leaders. I think the working hard variety has some advantages, which is that they have come from down up, and so really the difficulties of what is down below. So these are the only things I can see. And the second question which you asked, what is the definition of, what did you say?
Successful life.
Successful life. Can I change that successful life to a happy life? The word. Because I know many people who are very successful, but are very unhappy. And there are many people who are very happy. I must tell you this story. A man goes to, I'm not saying we should be like that. A man goes to a village, a management expert, and he sees this villager lying on the bed, on a cot, a little bit rope-tied cot in India, with his leg up and smoking a beedi or whatever. Then he goes to him and he says, "Hey man, why are you wasting your time lying here?" He said, "Well, what should I do?" He said, "Okay, now do this." He says, "Okay, I'll do that, then you'll get this, okay, then you do this, okay, I'll get this, okay." And he goes on. And then he said, and then finally you can lie down and relax. He said, "I'm already relaxing." You see, so there is a different definition of success. Success need not mean, that you are successful in the conventional sense of the term. If a person is not happy, I think he's not successful. Whoever, whatever.
Yes, Stephen, you can ask another question. Yes, let's have one from the back here.
Just one point. In your wonderful books, Master, you talk about another dimension.
Sir.
And for us, of course, we don't see it. What can you tell us about that other dimension, if you like, that relates to leadership or relates to us being here today?
Perhaps we don't see that other dimension. I know it's ineffable, but is there any way you could just give us a clue as to that other dimension?
Yes, but you want it in your books, you explain it to us.
Yeah.
So we would like to know it from you.
Sir, if you have read the book,
I have.
and yeah, I know that. You have read the book, and if you at least have begun to think, there could be another dimension,
It is.
then I'm happy. Because the idea was only to make people think that there could be many other things which we don't know through our five senses. There must be something more. So the clue is, I'm trying to explain this to you. I can't give you a technique to see that, but which of course is a long process. But what I'm trying to say is, 50, 60 years ago, 60 years ago, I think, if I'm wrong, please correct me, everybody thought, the neurologist thought, that there is a little gland called the pineal gland, it's in the midbrain, down below. Now this little pineal gland was considered to be a vestige organ, meaning like the vermiform appendix, it has no function. It just had been there somehow, nobody knows, and so on. About 30, 40 years ago, they discovered that this particular little gland was a master gland that controlled one's circadian rhythm, which means how you sleep and how you wake up. When the pineal gland pumps a little bit of melatonin into your bloodstream, then you feel sleepy. And then you wake up fresh. What happens in jet lag is that there's some problem with this. So people eat melatonin. So this was discovered a few 50 years ago that this is a very important organ. Okay. Now, 100 years ago, this same Swami Vivekananda, who I talked about, said that perhaps the pineal gland is the stem of the 1,000-petal lotus, which is called the Sahasrara. How did he know? All I'm trying to say is, all the knowledge that we have, I don't know, we are going off the subject. All the knowledge that we have here depends on our five senses. This, and this. We are saying, we are proposing, perhaps there is another instrument of perception in us, many more, which are not active, which are dormant, not kinetic. And if there are ways and means to open the center, or one center, whatever, then it's perhaps possible for us to see things which are not normally sensed by the five senses. We would call that another dimension. Up to here I can go.
Thank you. Okay, well, one more question, I think. Yes? Okay. This is the last.
Including sort of giants down the ages have left a lot of rich teachings. How can we use these teachings in the workplace to become more virtuous leaders?
Absolutely. Gather these teachings together and expose it to more number of people, especially those who are on the decision-making level. It's very important. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
One question, which is begging. Only because I'm a virtuous leader.
This is more than a question, this is begging. You mentioned before, at the inception, that there's a tendency for people to not admit when they don't know an answer. If you blow that up by the 7.5 billion people that there are currently in the world, this world, there's a lot of ignorance. And it's very difficult for a small number of virtuous leaders to overcome that with all the technology, with scientific improvements, and to be able to feed the world's population. And I'm optimistic, but with the current state of leadership in the world, I'm not that optimistic.
Sure.
It's more like a...
So, can do is to increase this number, have more virtuous leaders, and it depends on us how we work towards it. The main thing is, don't give up. Please don't give up. You sounded very sad. Don't give up. I think it's possible.
That was a feast, and obviously thank you to the Master, and mainly for the idea, and Lord Broderick for hosting us. But also, the thanks I want to give is to you, because why did you come? You know, the invitation was virtuous leadership. You didn't come to somebody like, how can I lead, how can I make? You came because you're asking about virtuous leadership. So every one of you have that responsibility that we've been talking about, that you want to be a virtuous leader. And in fact, I know quite a lot of you, and I know quite a lot of you are too modest to even say you are a leader. You're thinking, you know, well, I'm not really, but now how do so it's taking great courage that you become a leader, and also then a wonderful heart to be a want to be a virtuous leader, and you are them, and you've got to have courage, and you've got to do it. So thank you. Thank you.